Hello, friend. Don't look behind you while I'm telling you a story. Story 1. Where all futures die. The wind slid across the cracked glass like an icy claw, slicing into the moss-covered surface of the rotting wood. The weather station atop the Lomnica Range had been shut down since the winter of 1976. Yet for reasons unknown, a stream of distorted, static signals began transmitting again from its outdated antenna on the waning moonlit night of late November. 1983. Elias, a retired signal repair engineer who once worked for the National Meteorological Institute, was the only person dispatched to the station under an emergency directive from the Poprad office. They didn't explain the reason, only emphasized that inexplicable signals were being emitted from a system that had been fully disconnected. And Elias was the only one who had previously worked on that transmission line before it was sealed. The old UAZ vehicle carrying Elias stopped at the foot of the mountain, the driver refusing to go further due to heavy snow. Elias had no choice but to carry a kerosene lamp, a food bag, and his radio tools to hike for 2 days through the bitter cold. Upon reaching the station, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The main door was unlocked. Snow covered the porch, but bore no new footprints. Yet, the signal tower's warning light was still dimly blinking yellow, despite no power lines connected to it by design. The control room reeked of burnt wood. A gray layer of dust coated the printing equipment, undisturbed for years, except for a small paper strip still neatly fed through the printer repeating the same string of characters: Lorna, Lorna. Elias had never known anyone by that name to have worked there, and couldn't understand why the system was functioning without a power source. Inspecting the circuit board revealed the first absurdity. The fuses were intact, but surrounded by a strange black soot, resembling ash mixed with singed hair, coiled around the wiring as if someone or something had touched them with wet fingers. That first night, Elias pitched his tent right inside the main monitoring room, since the sleeping quarters were buried in snow and webs. Around midnight, a sound came from the rooftop, not snow falling or wind, but rhythmic, slow, like dragging footstep across thin wooden planks. He turned on his flashlight, gripping his pocket knife, stepping cautiously up the decaying stairs to the attic, only to find a series of sealed windows with frosted glass, undisturbed. However, on returning downstairs, he saw the only framed photograph in the hallway had fallen, a team photo from 1972, and beneath the cracked glass, the face of the woman standing in the center had been gouged out with fingernails or a sharp object. Her face was gone, carved down to the white paper, and under it was a letter faintly bearing the name Lorna fading beneath the flickering bulb. Elias couldn't sleep that night, even as the cold made his nose begin to bleed. The name Lorna kept repeating in his mind, not because it was unfamiliar, but because he began recalling a memory long buried from his first year on the job, a female technician who had been assigned to Lomnica in the winter of 1972, who disappeared during an undocumented blizzard. Her body was never found, or any personal belongings, except an incomplete tape recording. Elias remembered listening to it one late night in the archives. The woman's voice wasn't reading a report, but whispering to someone else in the room. "If you've heard this, don't come up here. That thing, it won't let me leave." At the time, he thought it was a prank to scare new recruits. But now, in this frozen, dust-covered station, that whisper felt all too real. Elias decided to search for the tape, though. He wasn't sure it still existed. Opening the steel door to the storage basement where thermal data and recordings were kept, a wave of old metal and damp air hit him, followed by a sudden, blinding headache. In the darkness, his flashlight scanned the shelves, where decaying cartons clung together from moisture, until he stopped at a small box etched with the words, LD-1972, log number 7. As he reached for it, he felt something soft and cold, tugging at his hand from the bottom of the box, like plunging into a basin of shed hair. Startled, he jerked back, the flashlight swinging and briefly illuminating a corner where Elias saw a hunched silhouette, unmoving, visible only for the second the light passed over. No sound, no emotion, just a dense black form behind the cabinet. He aimed the light again, but the corner was empty. Asterisk, back in the control room, he played the tape, and a female voice emerged, fragmented like it was scraping through shards in her throat. I was wrong. I called it. I thought I was contacting the atmosphere. But it didn't come from there. It listens behind the static. It responds with, my flesh. Elias bit his lip until it bled. Each word etched a vivid image in his mind, a ghost. Forced to speak, trapped between dimensions. Her voice anchored not to any frequency, but to the remnants of an old signal still clung to by the living. Suddenly, the player sparked and died, wires bursting into blue flickers before going dead. Silence swallowed the room. Elias collapsed, clutching his head. On the wall in front of him, a message had been clawed into the wood from the inside. Elias, it's your turn. It wasn't written, it was carved. From the hallway, something began to approach. The sound wasn't like footsteps, but more like nails dragging across rusted concrete. With each step closer, Elias felt memories rise like open wounds, not his own, but someone else's, alongside a sense of being watched deep into his spine. He neither ran nor stood, only turned to face the doorway's darkness, where a shadow was slowly consuming the hallway's light with a presence that defied physics, like the room itself was melting as it entered. Everything sagged, even Elias's voice failed in his throat. And then he saw it, not human, not beast, but the form of a pain so old it had taken on flesh. A skeletal demon, eyes hollow like shattered glass domes, mouth agape as if torn open. By invisible force, its skin cracked like charred paper, yet didn't flake. Across its chest, a crude seam gaped open, stuffed with black hair like the insides of a doll turned inside out. It looked at Elias, not with eyes, but with a pulling force he felt himself seen through from childhood, when he first saw his mother cry alone at night, without understanding why. The sense of belonging nowhere, thrown into an inner frost. That was when Elias screamed inwardly, but his mouth wouldn't move, his tongue frozen by a sudden cold, like ice growing in his throat. The demon raised a hand, its fingers stretching like warped copper pipes, and touched his forehead. In that instant, every image in Elias's mind was overwritten. Shattered wind gauges. A woman's corpse contorted backward on the archive ceiling, her hair stuck to it like veins, eyes wide, mouth silent yet broadcasting a frequency Elias understood because it was his own voice replayed. Help me. I am you. Then the space collapsed, and Elias plunged into thick blackness, hearing a faint murmuring like receding waves until he awoke in his own room. The door was shut, lights still on, everything unchanged, except the tape, now charred and curled. On the desk, beside a yellowed scrap of paper bearing a scrawled warning. If you can still hear it, then it hasn't left. Elias felt his teeth begin to chatter, not from cold, but from his jaw involuntarily seizing, as though his body rejected its own awareness. Something had entered his mind, and it was waiting. The room remained eerily quiet, but Elias couldn't deny it any longer. Something had changed, not only in the station, but in his very body. He began to feel new textures rising under his skin, like a second layer forming beneath his dermis, not painful, not itchy, just thickening, absorbing something from the air. Asterisk, he reopened the final log written by the missing station chief. Originally locked in the technical center safe, but accessed by Elias through auxiliary systems. The writing was erratic, but mentioned a radiant zone surfacing from beneath the ice, an ancient cave-like structure buried beneath permafrost. Invisible on radar, but vividly clear in thermal imaging. No one could explain why. No one knew why a survey team entered without reporting, but now Elias knew. They weren't sent. They were summoned, one by one, just as he was. He began hearing whispers blur inside his chest, not from his ears or brain, but from his sternum, where his heart still beat like a human's. Yet every pulse sent a different sound to his brain, begging, groaning, not in any recognizable voice, yet hauntingly familiar. He locked his door, retrieved his notebook where he'd logged abnormal psychological symptoms over the past 3 weeks, and uncovered a terrifying truth. In the dreams described by surviving personnel, at least 3 mentioned a pitch black room without doors or walls where they were hung by their spines and drained of memory by unseen fingers. At first, Elias had dismissed this as psychological stress from harsh living conditions. But now he too remembered the exact same dream, except he had never shared it with anyone. So why was it written in someone else's report before they vanished? That question led Elias to the control center, where all biometric data from team members' wearables were stored. Analyzing the data, he found the alpha wave frequencies of nearly everyone had shifted simultaneously on the night of May 13, 1986, a date with no matching physical event, save one anomaly. The wind stopped for 6 hours and the sky over. The station dimmed without explanation, not from clouds. Not an eclipse, not atmospheric, but as if the world itself had paused. Replaying the last transmissions from the station chief's wearable, Elias noticed a barely audible sound buried in the static. He enhanced it, filtered the noise, and heard a rapid breath, then a woman's voice whispering not a cry for help, but don't make me remember. Elias realized then the entity wasn't here to kill, but to unlock a layer of memory long sealed within each person. And once someone remembered everything, they were no longer themselves because those memories didn't belong to them, but to the abyss buried for millennia. Now, only Elias remained, and the memories were bleeding through from dreams, from breath, from blood turning to ash gray. Asterisk in a half-awake, half-dream state, Elias groped along the corridor coated with cold mist, where darkness was no longer absence of light, but a substance, thickening by the hour, as though the space was being squeezed, contracting segment by segment into the earth's depths. Each step of his felt heavier than usual, not because his body had weakened, but because something beneath his feet was holding him back, as if every stone, every ribbon of ice sensed his presence and sought to anchor him to the sealed layers of memory. Elias reached the door of the equipment chamber, where the archaeological team had stored their earliest recovered artifacts from the abyss, where every nightmare had begun. The steel door was rusted, yet showed no signs of forced entry or damage, as if opened from the inside either by someone knowing the security code or by something that didn't need a code. Inside, a dim yellow light flickered upon objects, draped in white cloths. A damp sensation clung to Elias's skin, as if the air carried not only moisture but a layer of evaporated skin. And the stench of rot overwhelmed him, as though his own body was decaying. He approached the long stone table in the center, where the captain's notes recorded a non-reflective artifact. Elias removed the cloth to reveal a sphere of unknown material, its surface so smooth that no dust could cling to it. Yet, it reflected no light, as if existing beyond human understanding. Gazing at it, he found his eyes could no longer adjust focus, as though the sphere was drawing all consciousness out of his optic nerves, not because it emitted light, but because it was too still. So still that time around it seemed to halt. Elias heard faint breaths emanating from the sphere, not from someone trapped inside, but as though it condensed hundreds of breaths into a slow pulsation like an ancient heart. Then, suddenly he saw an image not through his eyes, but manifesting within the folds of his brain. A group in animal skins dragging a chained creature across black cliffs, blood seeping from its joints, forming burning red characters on the snow. They pulled it into a hollow beneath the ice, not to kill it, but to imprison it, and afterward, the entire group went blind. Elias realized these were memories from millennia ago, not his own, but grafting themselves onto his spine bit by bit. Behind his head, pain shot in waves as if nails were being driven. Blood flowed from his nose, ears, even eyes, but he could no longer stop. The sphere began to rotate slightly in midair, no one touching it, no machinery, no motion, as though it recognized Elias as a new portal to escape, and he lacked the strength to refuse. A silent, shuddering sound resonated in his mind, not through his ears, and from within the sphere. A thin thread of darkness began to pour forth, entering his eyelids, his mouth, his pores. Elias collapsed, yet remained conscious, his whole body trembling uncontrollably. A voice echoed in his head, not clearly male or female, devoid of tone, but a collection of concepts spoken simultaneously. We were once one, we were separated. So humanity could remain whole. Now you remember there is no turning back. Elias screamed in his mind, but his throat could no longer produce sound. The spheres stopped spinning, then dissolved into ash, each speck clinging to his skin, melting into his blood. And now, all the memories not his own had become part of his body. He forced himself to stand, seeing his own shadow on the floor, but not like his own. It was longer, horned, and walking in the opposite direction. Elias tried to blink, but the darkness clinging to his pupils would not release. With every step he took, strange memories continued to pour in, not as images, but as sensations. The icy despair of being buried alive in stone for eons. A hunger not for food, but for voices, for a call, for souls still stirring. Now, all the sounds in the station had slowed, elongated, as if time itself had been extracted from normal flow. He returned to the central monitoring room, once used to control every operational device. Monitors cast pale, distorted light, and cameras displayed images of the vanished crew. One sat motionless in a mess hall, head bowed over a moldy tray of food, dried blood staining his collar. Another stood in the cold storage, skin bruised, blue-gray, yet eyes wide open, whispering something unintelligible. Elias switched through each feed. No one alive remained, or rather, no one entirely human anymore. They'd been retained not by something specific, but by this place itself, the bottomless abyss beneath the ice, where nameless shapes were sealed by a will not human. Elias saw one final image, himself, walking the corridor, in the present moment, but no camera, no cables, no power source. Just a frame replaying his every movement before he made it. As if time was playing back in reverse, or as if the one observing him not only knew every gesture, but was rewriting his behavior in real time. Elias dared not leave his chair, but his body rose, hand touching the cold glass of the monitor. The image inside vanished, replaced by a strange carved symbol, a circle made of unbroken characters, formed of fractured segments like each stroke was a slash. Each character struck his eyes like a hammer to the spine. He recoiled, but his head no longer obeyed. The echo in his mind returned. You are the gate, the conduit, the recompense for what was torn from life. Elias is no longer your name. Memories flooded in again, this time not visually, but olfactory. The smell of raw flesh, of burning hair, of sacrificial rites buried beneath the ice, where the last torches were lit only to extinguish light. He collapsed in the room, veins beneath his skin bulging black like ink, quivering as if convulsing. Something inside him wanted to escape, yet could not exist without this body. Elias shrieked in his mind, I am not you. I do not belong to that past. But the other only laughed not in sound, but as a sensation, a deeply ironic, calm awareness, as if the entirety of human history had been a faint joke. And he was the first witness, he's something named in languages now dead, inscribed upon. The skin of those who burned themselves to seal it was now reviving in Elias's body. He forced himself to crawl to the emergency console, entering the self-destruct code, but the keyboard displayed only ancient characters, no familiar numbers. He had no choice but to let his hands type on their own, as though his body was merely a shell for a foreign intelligence returning. The windows cracked open outside. Through the frosted ice appeared red veins like blood coursing through stone. Elias realized the abyss beneath was not sealed, it was sleeping. And they, the ones who excavated, had only just awakened its first eyelids. The station began to tremble with irregular pulses, like the heart of a dying being clinging to life through desperate spasms. But this vibration did not come from machinery or geological forces. It was the echo of a will rising from depths beyond the concept of strata. Elias slid down from the control room. Blood sprayed from inside his skull from the internal shock. A cracking sound behind his neck convinced him it had fractured, but touching the bone, he felt it displaced, as though it was about to burst open, revealing something not human. A new sensation coursed through his blood simultaneously, and alluring, as if someone whispered in each red blood cell, "This is your true form, do not fear, return." Elias crawled along the long corridor of melting snow. Every puddle on the floor reflected not his image, but elongated faces, as if someone had been forced to laugh at the moment their soul was ripped from their body. All wall-mounted devices, shut down one by one, bulbs burnt to dust, leaving no glass shards. No light guided him, only the smell of human skin burning from within. Elias knew he could no longer escape, not from a creature, but from the truth that had existed within him since before he was born. He moved toward the main storage room where ancient ice cores had been drilled and preserved for study. He pressed the fingerprint reader. His print had changed, no longer biological spirals, but carved incisions like a knife marking black candle wax. Inside was utter darkness, but he didn't need light. He could see every ice block, clearly all cracked, none intact, as if they had dissolved from within, releasing what had been imprisoned for thousands of years. Elias walked down the aisles. Each step condensed the air around him, pressure pressing his chest as if diving deep in the ocean without gear. At the far end lay the largest ice block, the only specimen never analyzed because it's electromagnetic. Field broke every machine instantly. Now that block was stripped of its casing, blooming open like an inverted flower, its transparent layers folded inward, forming a void at the room's center. In that place, there was nothing, or rather, a place where everything was negated. Sound, light, temperature, even the notion of time. Elias stepped into that non-existent nexus, and for the first time he sensed his true form, no longer human or creature, but the extension of an ancient will, once imprisoned in ice by human blood. Now the final ice block had opened, and the voice within him was no longer a whisper, but a command. "You are the mouth of the abyss. The new call for us, bring them back." Veins split on Elias's arm, blackened ridges emerging like inscriptions of molten metal sliding over his skin, carving into bone, then dissipating into the air like dust. Elias understood. He had only one task now: leave the station, carrying the call to a land where humans still believed they reigned. To plant anew the roots of a race once sealed, not for lack of power, but because they were like gods. And when the station door swung open, the thick snow no longer hindered him. Gusts lashed against his broken flesh, yet no longer brought cold, for Elias himself had become the source of chill, a void into which death retreats to dwell. And amid the distant howls of the polar wastes, a whisper echoed from the ice. "Open. Open. Open all." Asterisk. The first to detect the signal from the station was a Norwegian rescue team, who received a stream of corrupted data, an unregistered frequency, rhythmically repeating every 22 seconds, composed of low-frequency pulses almost imperceptible except as waveform oscillations. When converted into a spectrogram, the display revealed an inexplicable image, a fragmented face, as if torn from a Gothic painting and reassembled in a grotesque distortion. That night, every member of the team suffered the same nightmare. Standing in a field of burning ice, a barefoot figure holds a transparent heart-shaped block of ice, beating slowly. Inside that heart, countless open eyes stare unblinking, as if trying to memorize each soul. But what awoke the team was not the vision, it was the sound emanating from the heart. Not a beat, but a small wet laughter leaking like blood from cracks in the stone, accompanied by a single word spoken in each of their mothers' voices, regardless of nationality. "Come back." The rescue team still set out on their mission, but mysteriously, all their transmissions ceased only 6 minutes after leaving base Snowstorm. No terrain obstacle, only a dead zone of silent void that swallowed plane and crew alike. Yet the true horror began when Elias crossed the northern edge of Greenland. Unprepared, no equipment, no cold weather gear, not even a shadow under his feet. Indigenous witnesses at first saw nothing unusual. A lone stranger marching across snow, and then as they drew near, they noticed his face was covered in a thin glaze of ice like a second skin. And his pupils weren't fixed, they drifted like ripples in a fish's eye, reflecting shapes behind them even though only white snow lay there. Elias spoke no words, touched no one, but wherever he passed, candles in houses extinguished as if grasped by an invisible hand. Mirrors cracked in spirals, like swirling portals to an endless abyss. Children fell ill. The elderly wept in their sleep and never awoke. On the third night, Elias did not stop. A young woman was found hanged indoors, her mouth unnaturally slit. Into a grin reaching from ear to ear, blood dripping onto the floor, forming patterns no one dared interpret. Deaths continue with no explanation. Unified by one trait, each victim's eyes stared fixedly northward. No matter their orientation, as if they had heard the call, Elias carried the call, not through ears, not through hearts, but within the spine, making vertebrae tremble as though ringing bells, and one by one drawn into the same freezing white dream with no end. Elias walked on, followed by a procession of soulless people, their eyes filled with black mist from within, their hair falling in clumps to the rhythm of his echoing steps. Upon reaching the first town, no force could stop the storm rising from. His bare footprints, not a storm of snow, but shattered laughter, crying infants, melting stone, flesh stretched like plastic all fused into a deadly cord that opened the first chapter of something older than guilt. Returning through the body that was once Elias, now just a shell, a loudspeaker for the unnamed abyss, when the last signal from Connacht ceased entirely. Authorities had no choice but to activate Himmelspalt, a protocol frozen since the 1960s after this so-called Oslo Rift, another encounter with an immeasurable metaphysical phenomenon. As now, it began with crackling laughter from the ice and lost souls. But Himmelspalt was not a military unit, it was a group of people, mostly no longer officially recognized. Survivors of phenomena hidden as natural disasters, accidents, or mental illness, stored in an underground Icelandic bunker warmed by geothermal heat. For the first time in 43 years, the submerged door opened, and what emerged was not a person but a scent. The scent of burnt wood, of charred fingernails, and a final indescribable odor that made skin prick and pores contract, as if the soul was being awakened in the flesh. Himmelspalt dispatched 3 members, nameless and numbered only unarmed, wearing brass masks dusted with cold ash, their robes lined with strips of unburied human hair. Their mission was not to attack Elias, but to seal the field conduit, a concept no outsider understood. A partially declassified record from 1982 noted, when a soul crosses from death without purification, it carries not only resentment, but its own old time structure, and if the conduit is not severed, that time will overwrite the reality it inhabits. Elias thus became the center of a diseased time loop where all laws disintegrated and memories ceased to be linear. The trio found Elias in an abandoned church, half buried in ice, once a Swedish mission station from the late 19th century. Inside was pitch black, not from lack of light, but because light could not enter. It was absorbed, refracted, disintegrated into dust at the threshold. They stepped in, and no one outside heard anything for over 12 minutes. Then the door burst open, and only one came out maskless, eyeless, fingernailless, its robe unraveling like dust in the wind. It walked northward, against all known paths. Its lips moved in silent repetition, as if for learning how to speak. Each step softening the icy ground beneath into glass, revealing hundreds of corpses in uniforms from all eras. From World War soldiers to oil workers to ancient clergy, all lying on their sides, eyes open, hands reaching as if to hold on to something final. And the sole survivor of Himmelspalt was clearing the way, not to exorcise, but to transmute souls. A ritual no one remembered how to perform. Yet ancient Gothic black ink manuscripts in Visby's Bern Library described exactly what was happening. A corpse will learn to smile, a wraith to breathe, a demon to love, and then all three will transfigure, heralding an era with no choice between life and death, only to remain or to vanish. That day, the northern sky stopped rotating. Navigation devices worldwide faltered within 6 seconds. Migratory birds lost direction toward the pole, as though a global soul center had been reset. And Elias, or the shell that was Elias, stood, staring up at a sky with no stars, only a blood-dark red streak across white, poised to welcome something slowly rising from beneath the ice, belonging to no realm of space. It did not emerge with movement, but by negation of matter, of distance, of being, and finally of waiting itself. It was present not because it had arrived, but because it had never left. What was evoked from below the ice was not a form, not a body, but the absolute sensation of a remembrance unlinked to any specific memory. As if every soul ever died at the pole left an emotional refraction that now, intertwined into a demon web, not to capture people, but to hold the existence of formerly human who could no longer transcend. The last masked mortal of Himmelspalt, now transfigured, stepped into that vortex without hesitation. The red streak from the sky pouring down as flowing silk that wrapped around its bare bones. In an instant, the entire space froze, then cracked, silently, like glass overheated, and the first sounds arose, not for ears, but for teeth, for sternum, for tendons, and any living being present would feel their joints whisper among the blood, the name of an unspoken soul. Whose name is the final key to the ward? Elias then, or the Incarnate shell, was covered in gray powder, like bone ash. But when the wind blew, the ash didn't blow away, it sank into the flesh, clinging to every shriveled piece of tissue like wax, then shifting color from ashen, white to smoky black to a nameless shade one that human sight cannot focus on, forcing the pupil to dilate as though staring into a storm's eye. And from there, twisted memories began to pour, not his own, but those of everyone Elias had touched, who had stood near him, who had dreamed of him even once. And all those memories formed a tangible language, carving matrix like veins across the snow, a chaos pattern like fractured eggs in a kill. A woman in southern Greenland observed it through binoculars. A former archaeologist banned from practice after discovering a dateless soil layer. Beneath Skyen Monastery, she said the carvings matched Inuit legends of spirit-binding burials, where spirits were forced to confess the living's sins instead of their own, and if they misremembered, each layer of their skin would peel away with each word amid the cracking ice. She quietly brought the skeleton of a child she had stolen from a demon in 1987 toward the phenomenon, not to stop it, but to close the circle, a practice forbidden by all northern clergy, because closing the circle traps the soul between lives that can't reincarnate nor disintegrate, and all curses, disasters, karmic debts it bears remain suspended, waiting to fall upon anyone daring to utter its name again. She believed Elias was the soul left uncircled since the Nightmare Village War, Kalkbien, where Swedish soldiers burned an entire town to punish a forbidden ritual. And Elias was the last child pulled out of Pyre alive, but since then he never grew, only learned to change bodies, and with each change, his memory splintered further until he no longer knew who he was, only feeling cold, hungry, and a desperate need to be heard. And now, when everything has converged at the north, the sky red as diluted blood, snow frozen in mid-air as if time halted, the ending arriving is not death, but a composite consciousness forming. Elias, the demon, the wraith, the archaeologist, the souls beneath the ice, the transfigured Himmelspalt member, Kanakal becoming one, a soul entity beyond name, beyond division, and beyond erasure, a new existence the world cannot accept or deny. Only stand and await the consequences of its presence to continue writing the rest of human history. Asterisk. The unification occurred without a center, without boundaries, and without the need for any ritual to acknowledge it. It simply happened because the time was right, and the right time was when no more prayers were heard in the polar regions, When chapels stood abandoned, statues had their faces eroded smooth by the wind, and hymns were forgotten in rotting archives. Everything once sacred, that humanity used to separate itself from the other realm, now remained only as hollow shapes. And in that space, where cold no longer numbed but dissolved the very concept of flesh, every last drop of blood, insight Elias began to seep out. Not through wounds, but through pores, fingernails, bone, gathering in the air to form a thick, gelatinous sphere that neither floated nor fell, but simply existed in the sky like a pupil-less eye observing the world through mute memory, hundreds of kilometers away. Another archaeological team was advancing into a restricted zone after receiving a low-frequency signal from a device believed buried since 1979. Unaware it had once belonged to a group of apostate monks who had tried to use Elias's soul to negotiate with an entity, no. With a wraith they believed was the source of collective dreams plaguing coastal communities in western Greenland. Those dreams shared a trait. Every dreamer awoke with a torn throat and no physical signs of assault, only saying, "I screamed so much in the dream," but the dream had no sound. And now, these archaeologists, rational, secular individuals, would be the first to enter the space inverted by Elias's transfigured presence. They stepped in, not with feet, but with decision. One by one, their minds were filled with images, not hallucinations, but memories that had never happened, a kind of memory without origin. For example, the expedition leader saw a naked man standing in the snow, eyes sewn shut with copper wire, endlessly counting from 1 to 3, and every time he tried to recall his purpose, the counting drowned out all thought. A woman behind him saw her hands skinless, her fingers joined. With human hair, every object she touched felt like the bare back of someone still breathing, as if the entire space was lined with the living feigning death, or the dead resisting decay. Eventually, when they reached the core where Elias was suspended in halo of color-shifting ash, they all fell to their knees, not from fear, but from a pull within the spine, as if the ground was no longer for standing, but for merging, dissolving, surrendering the last shred of humanity. From that point on, no one retained their name. Each became a nameless mouth that opened not to speak, but to carry an echo. They began to recite what had been buried since the 14th century texts, not written in words, but in sensations, stories that lived only in the body. For instance, do not move toward the light when your name is called backward from within the ice. For that is not your name, it is mimicry, the voice of the wraith learning to summon. With each utterance, the snow atop Elias sank like quicksand, revealing a skull heated to red, marked by a circular incision at the forehead, a sealing sigil carved to imprison the soul, denying both rebirth and release. That sigil had been etched into his head when he was the sole survivor from Kokbien, and now it glowed, cracked, and split with a sound like rotted wood breaking. At that moment, another entity, not a spirit but a demon, stepped out from the fourth layer of ice, the forgotten tier of history where all unacknowledged things are compressed. This demon required no fixed form. It was the residue of desired will, the will of souls denied transcendence, now gathered beneath a demonic shell to continue living inside the bodies of those who dared draw near. No one at the Southern Research Station knew that North had collapsed, not geologically, but in the structure of reality itself. All existing maps no longer matched local magnetic curves. Radio instruments returned frequencies without identifiable origins, as if echoing from centuries past or worse, from a parallel present unfolding in another space-time block. Inside the fourth ice layer, where the demon had emerged, every old contour blurred beneath a pearlescent gray vapor. Neither mist nor gas, but the fourth state of memory, a liminal realm between forgetfulness and fixation. As it entered Elias's spine, his nervous system reacted as if reliving every past life death. Without flame, without pain, only an internal disintegration scentless smoke, escaping from joints. Ears and eye sockets carrying the images of hundreds of children who, never grew up in the old village, each crawling on their knees, mouths sewn shut, eyes blindfolded with white thread, marching toward Elias. With every step, the ice cracked softly like thin glass, not shattering but trembling like a mirror remembering what no one wishes to see. And when the first child reached out to touch Elias's temple, he felt nothing but emptiness, so deep his nerves had to invent a new type of sensation to comprehend it. The feeling of something that was never you but knew you entirely. The feeling of being watched from inside your own skull. There within his mind, the child door. Its remaining shadow began to act, not with voice, but gesture. It slid a broken fingernail into the ceiling sigil and scraped away the curling black smoke like raw flesh. With every scrape, a memory Elias never lived emerged. A sacrificial rite in 1642 inside a roofless church. A wooden chest full of jars containing darkness. A 3-beat knock from behind the mirror whenever someone lied to themselves. Each time, Elias was buried deeper into his own core, unable to resist, unable to dissolve, his body now home to 3 layers of existence. Flesh, soul, and post-echo, a kind of spiritual scar left when a soul is flayed in a dream and never wakes. The demon didn't need to possess him. It only had to observe, for every glance it cast made one of Elias's blood vessels burst like glass, piece by piece, until his blood no longer flowed, but sought paths in the air, forming symbols not words, not language, but commands for those who would come next. The second archaeological team, still struggling with a map rewritten by radio waves, had no idea they were approaching a center stripped of its name. A focal point where faith was peeled away, where death was no longer an end but a molting of guilt. From that moment, their every step ceased being a choice and became a response, as though their presence had been orchestrated since the 18th century, when a mad abbot in Alsace recorded in a now banned European manuscript, "When the sun sets. In the 13th month, some will reach the thrice-buried land. They will not know what they seek, but they will find what none dare name. And now the polar sun has set not by orbit, but by decision. Someone or something is folded. Light behind the field of vision, and in that darkness the demon need not move, for all are walking toward it." None of the members in the second archaeological team knew that their footsteps were being echoed, not in direction, but in time. The ice beneath them wasn't truly solid, but rather like a living membrane capable of remembering the weight of steps once pressed into it. And with each new step, there came a response, not an acoustic echo, but a reverberation of memory, as if the very earth had become infected with recollection and was now learning to use human nerves to replay old pain. Natalie, the terrain mapping specialist, was the first to notice something wrong when her altimeter began fluctuating wildly despite their walking across a flat ice plain. Elevation levels rose and fell erratically, sometimes dipping into negatives, making her feel as if they were walking on the ocean floor rather than a frozen continent. The deeper they ventured into the region once marked by the old coordinates of Northlight Station, the more their biometric readings began to warp. Heart rates slowed even as blood pressure rose. Pupils dilated despite the darkness, and no one felt cold anymore. Instead, there was a subtle, warm, tingling sensation, not caused by temperature, but as if something within their blood was reacting to the aurora light. A light no longer physical, but possessing smell, taste, and weight, like a thick vapor coating their throats, forcing them to swallow repeatedly as a defense against the body unraveling. On the third night, while camping beside a shallow ice pit, an object rose from the dark water below, not floating, not sinking, but seemingly held aloft by the will of someone long dead. It was a humanoid mass with no head, no feet, just a torso wrapped in a decayed reddish-brown cloak sewn with coarse hemp, from which came a rhythmic knock, 3 beats at a time, like the heartbeat of something not alive, not mechanical, but mnemonic. One of the youngest in the group, Decker, approached for the camera and a magnetic reader, but the equipment immediately burned out with a sharp odor, then fell silent, and Decker stood frozen. as if hypnotized, mumbling incomprehensibly, eyes wide and empty, before slowly stepping into the ice hole as though the water were solid ground. Not sinking, not thrashing, just descending calmly as if down invisible stairs, leaving the surface empty, still as a mirror. When the team rushed over, there was no trace of him, no bubbles, no sounds, and yet no one dared to say his name aloud. Because what overwhelmed them wasn't grief, but guilt, as though they had offered him willingly to that thing in order to continue forward. That night in Natalie's notebook, which had remained locked in her sleeping bag pocket, a new passage appeared. Written in her own handwriting, though she couldn't remember writing it. 3 more must go before the ground may open. Each must enter at the right moment, in the right thought, in the right fear. Those who resist will be swallowed whole and not dissolve. When she read it aloud to the others, no one responded. They simply bowed their heads in silence, as if subconsciously agreeing, and that was when she realized they were no longer a group of people, but a ritual in motion, each person a beat, a command, a part of a chant written through path, through disappearance, through warm blood not yet cooled. From that point on, every step they took ceased being an individual act and became an echo of something that had lain beneath the ice longer than human history. Something never worshipped, but always felt an ancient wraith without a name or form, but one that knew every forgotten sin, still waiting to be remembered. When they reached the final point of the original coordinates, once the center of Northlight Station, before being erased from all maps, the ground was no longer ice, but a flat sheet of pale gray stone, like ash fallen from a dead sky, too. Smooth for depth, too dull for reflection, and silent. At the center stood a circular monolith, taller than a man, its surface etched with spiral grooves like giant fingerprints carved by a boneless species. Around the monolith lay 4 flat slabs of stone, each bearing a human-shaped impression, not matching any of the team's proportions, but longer, thinner, as if the bodies had been stretched into a state of motionless tension. As Natalie stepped closer, her Geiger counter suddenly spiked, not from radiation, but as if measuring the compression of souls within the air. Then the knocking returned, steady, 3 beats at a time, but now it resounded from within their bones like a blood-borne bell, compelling the group to approach and lie on the 4 stone slabs. No one gave orders, no one spoke, as if there. Bodies had been pre-programmed to enact a rite initiated centuries ago. Only Natalie remained standing, trembling as she watched them close their eyes, whispering pleas in a language she had never heard, like children hypnotized by memories not their own. She tried to run, but each step grew heavier, the air seeming to solidify into invisible cords wrapping her legs, anchoring her in place, forcing her to witness the monolith begin to breathe. Yes, the stone itself was swelling and collapsing, like lungs, and with each breath, the ground quivered like a womb preparing to deliver something unnamed, unformed, a pure concept of pain. Then a voice, not external, but from within her chest, spoke in her dead mother's voice. Don't run. You're not a witness. You are the end. And as Natalie looked up, she saw herself lying on a 5th stone slab one that hadn't been there before, while her actual body remained standing, hollow, soulless, eyes stretched open to the point of tearing, mouth unable to speak before disintegrating, her flesh unraveling like diluted ink soaking into ash. The sky above began to spin, not following wind or Coriolis force, but in a spiral pattern like the eye of something waking for the first time after millennia frozen in the coldest layer of hell. And within that eye were all the faces that had ever vanished at Northlight layer upon layer. Generations of wraiths stacked in unconscious density, waiting for an escape, for a ritual complete enough to unseal the coffin of time. Natalie no longer resisted, for she knew she had gone too far beyond the boundary of choice. She was no longer human. But the final fragment of a shattered prayer, now reassembled through centuries of accumulated fear, through each madness, each unconfirmed death, each knock repeated like a forgotten incantation. And when the monolith split open, No monster emerged, only a mirror broken, but each shard reflected a different future, each showing her dying in a different way, with different pain at different moments, and all those futures had already begun, simultaneously, irreversible. Northlight was not merely the site of a catastrophe. It was the place where choice ceased to exist, where all possibilities happened at once, and escape was impossible, like a nightmare without a waking point. Then the last light above the melting. Ice faded into void, taking with it every breath, every name, every story. No one remained alive to tell what truly happened. Only the cold stone continued counting in 3-beat cycles, waiting for new arrivals bearing just enough fear to restart. The right of a wraith never named, but always remembered by those who know they cannot recall what they've truly forgotten. Story 2. The Sister Never Named. The pale blue moonlight fell quietly over the arid hills north of Vetlo, where time seemed drained and every movement tiptoed as if afraid to shatter something asleep. Night wind slid across grass blades, hardened like metal, producing a sound that resembled the faint tooth-grinding hiss of the starving dead crawling just beneath the earth. No birds, no insects. Only the faint breath of something that existed silently in the distance, beyond the decaying wooden fence forgotten for nearly 3 decades. The name Dead Grass Hill appeared on no maps, mentioned in no town records, and had nearly vanished from all stories. But if one ever spoke to the older residents of northern Harrow County on a night quiet enough to make palms sweat, they might whisper, "Don't step there. Don't make the grass move." Gordon Lake, a man in his 30s with tousled, straw-brown hair like autumn weeds caught in wind, sat motionless behind the wheel, his moss-colored pickup. He stared out the window with a dull gaze, like someone just waking from a dream that smelled of damp soil. No one told him to come here. No one knew he came. But the letters had continued to slip through the mail slot of his small rental downtown. No sender, no stamp, no ink, just yellowing pages scrawled in graphite with a circle crossed by a diagonal line. And the words, "I'm still there. You forgot me." The first time, he ignored it. The second, he tore it up. But the third, he folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. Something about the jittery lines of the drawing trembled as if the hand that drew it had fought off an invisible seizure, as if it was written from the other side of the veil between life and death. Gordon stepped out, boots cracking the grass, like stepping on brittle bones. Ahead was a chest-high fence of silvered oak, so rotted that the slightest push could bring it down. A rusted lock dangled loosely from the small iron gate. He didn't touch it, just nudged it open. It gave way easily, as if it had waited for him a long time. The moon seemed to retreat, leaving behind a well of shadow beyond the fence. The scent of dry grass mixed with ash and half-burned pine resin. There were black streaks on the ground, indistinct in shape but enough to make him pause. They looked like drag marks of something large, heavy, pulled along in utter silence. Gordon still remembered the dream that had haunted him for 2 weeks. A small wooden house in the middle of the hill. No doors, no windows. In the dream, he always entered and always woke the moment the doors shut behind him. Heart racing, face slick with sweat, mouth sour like he had screamed into a void. He had never told anyone. And now, atop the slope, faint behind trees blackened. Like burnt steel was that house. No lights, no wires, no tire tracks. Everything ended here, as if the world had long ceased and this was its final leftover piece. Gordon walked slowly, each step crushing memories. The air grew heavier, as if he were descending into water, though the cracked earth beneath stayed dry. At times, he caught flickers of white from the corner of his eyelight reflections, perhaps, but when he turned, only dead grass and shadowed trees remained. The cabin door wasn't shut completely, tilted like the crooked smile of someone. Hanged. Gordon stood before it, hand steady, throat parched. In that moment, he didn't know why he still moved forward. But something deep in his mind, a voice he couldn't recall ever hearing, whispered, "If you leave now, You will never sleep again. Inside, the house was pitch black as if all light had been drained. No dust, no moldy smell, no cobwebs. Raw wooden walls bore knife marks, random and directionless. On the floor lay a circle of charcoal, nearly faded, but its strange shape remained like a burned scar on flesh. And in the center of that circle was a cloth doll, but not a child's toy. The doll wore a dirty white wedding dress, its eyes stitched with black thread, its mouth a long slit sewn shut with fine wire, dried blood staining its fabric edges. One hand was raised, as if waving. Gordon didn't remember when he dropped to his knees. He knelt before it. And for the first time in years since the day his sister vanished in the woods behind their house, he wept. Because he recognized the dress. It was the one Emily had described in her dream. A child's wedding gown. She once said she'd wear it when she grew up and married a man who never lies. The breathing grew clearer, echoing in this small house as if from behind the walls. But he didn't turn, didn't flee, because then he understood that breath had lived inside him a very long time, and it had waited long enough. Gordon didn't know how much time passed while kneeling in that small house. No clock, no sunlight, filtered in. The only thing he could hear was his own heartbeat mixed with a damp trickling sound, like water dripping from moss-covered stone, though the room was dry and barren. A cold pressure clung to his nape like fingernails tracing. His skin, pressing one by one into his spine, stretching his vertebrae like over-tightened strings. He reached out with a trembling hand to touch the doll. As his fingertip brushed its frayed fabric, a softness rose, not physical, but like something touched him back from the other side. Nothing else happened. But Gordon's whole body turned. Ice. He inhaled sharply, sat upright, and noticed the house no longer looked the same. The left wall was gone. No, not gone, it remained, but now opened into a narrow hallway, stretching into darkness. A corridor that should not exist within. The cabin's structure. The wooden panels were crooked, the ceiling so low Gordon had to crouch. The air was thick with the smell of burnt paper and wet hair. The moonlight outside had faded completely. Only a faint pale glow, like from the bottom of a rusted well, shimmered in the distance. Gordon didn't hesitate. He stepped in. The hallway felt longer than it looked. Every footstep echoed like walking over the crust of something asleep. In some sections, the walls cracked open, revealing pitch-black gaps, and from within, whispers emerged, not quite speech, but like children imitating adults, babbling broken, repeating one phrase over and over. I saw him. I saw him. I saw. The sentence fractured into meaningless syllables, but Gordon knew they weren't his thoughts. Not in his head, they were in the walls. He stopped as the hallway opened into a larger room with low ceilings and red clay brick walls. At its center stood a full-length mirror, taller than him, rimmed in tarnished copper, draped in old black cloth. With each step toward it, the mirror trembled gently, as if stirred by wind, though no window existed. Written in dried blood on the cloth were symbols, ancient, geometric, unlike any alphabet. But in Gordon's mind, they began to take shape. As if he had always known them, just forgotten. Call its name. Beneath the writing, a smear of blood streaked downward like a child's hand had clawed at the fabric. Gordon stepped back, but he couldn't look away. A part of him whispered. A part that hadn't been human since the night Emily vanished at 12 years old, in those very woods behind the house. 18 years ago. He quietly raised a hand, gripped the fabric, and pulled it down. The cloth fell without sound. But in that instant, the air reversed not wind, but a vacuum pain that drew all sensation backward. The mirror revealed itself. Gordon's reflection was blurred, wrong in proportion. The mirror wasn't cracked or dirty, but what it showed wasn't real. He saw himself 12 years old, mud on his face, eyes red, and behind the boy in the reflection stood a small figure in white, head tilted, brushing her hair aside, smiling. but her mouth was a long slit sewn shut with wire. Emily. Gordon recoiled, but the image stayed. He looked over his shoulder, nothing there. When he turned back, the boy in the mirror had stepped closer to the glass. Emily stood behind him, eyes solid black, whispering into his ear. A wet sound rang out wood, splitting, like a spine breaking. Backward. From the ceiling's edge behind the mirror, a hand dropped down, fingers unnaturally long like bamboo, twisted sideways as if broken many times and healed wrong. A child's hand, but the skin was gray, waterlogged and wrinkled. Gordon didn't scream. He couldn't. His throat seized. All he could do was watch that hand slide slowly down the mirror, piercing the glass like liquid mud, resting on the boy's shoulder, and at that moment the reflection shattered. Not with a crash, but with a cry. The little girl's weeping over and over, not in fear, but in fury, as if screaming to the viewer, "Why didn't you come back?" The mirror now turned solid black, reflecting nothing. But as Gordon turned to leave the room, it flashed one more image, a reflection of the cabin behind him. But in the mirror, the front door was now shut tight, and Emily stood just inside. He couldn't turn around, didn't dare, because he heard a soft giggle right behind his back. Gordon stood frozen, his back chilled as if pressed against old, cracked, mold-stained ice, yet the air behind him wasn't cold, it was damp, like a breath lingering against his nape. The soft laughter from before hadn't vanished. It hadn't, broken into silence but flowed continuously like a sustained hum wrapping around his ear bones and sliding down his throat, making him nauseous despite an empty stomach. The space behind him was no longer a room, no longer red brick walls or dark wooden floors, but a warped void where gravity no longer distinguished ceiling from ground. Gordon knew that if he turned around, he would see nothing but Emily, but not the living Emily, not the little girl with golden hair trailing behind him after school, not the innocent laughter lost in the wind across the fields. What stood behind him, if it could still be called Emily, was a splinter of something warped too long. Buried too deep, its human features melted into resentment, in memories that survived on blood and sobs. He shut his eyes, resisting. Even the act of swallowing, for his throat was so dry that one movement sounded like paper tearing. But the sound of footsteps rising from inside the mirror made his eyes snap open. Not one step many. Each step sank into the floorboards like treading on broken bones. In the mirror, Gordon saw himself. No, that wasn't right. It was a version of him, older, hair matted, hands caked with mud, slowly walking through the hallway he had just crossed. It looked up, its eyes void of pupils, only milky whites as if blinded long ago. But worse than that, Gordon, the real one, felt his own feet beginning to move. Not by choice. As if an invisible thread connected his ankles to the reflection in the glass. One step, then another. Each step made his head heavier, as if sinking underwater. The laughter behind him faded, replaced by a whisper. "Do you remember the hole behind the house, Gordon? You said it was our secret, but I'm still down there." The blood drained from his face. He remembered, as clearly as the first winter. Rain in 1987, when Emily vanished after a game of hide-and-seek. The town scoured the woods, dug up tree stumps, combed through every patch of grass. But no one asked where Gordon had gone when night fell. No one noticed the dried mud on his pant legs. No one saw his trembling hands when his mother asked, "Where's your sister?" But there had been a hole, a shallow one, behind the ragweed bush just a few feet past the backyard fence. And in his dreams, he always saw Emily's eyes watching him through the soil. Not crying, just watching, waiting for him to say her name. He collapsed, knees slamming against the floor. A crack, like snapping dry bones, rang in his head. No, not in his head. Beneath the floor. Beneath the old planks came the pounding of something crawling up, like a body buried alive clawing at the house's underside for a way out. The wood trembled. No wind blew, yet his entire body shivered. He struggled to his feet, looked into the mirror, nothing there now, just his own reflection. The right age, clothes dirty, eyes bloodshot. But behind the reflection where the wall should be was a stone door. It didn't belong to the house's structure. The door was carved in swirling patterns like claw marks etched in blood across gray rock, and in its center was a lock fashioned from human hair. Gordon couldn't remember if he'd spoken, but the door creaked open, and the stench poured out like rotting flesh steeped in cold water. Along with it, a faint sound, children muttering, as if counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The counting looped endlessly. And with each number, Gordon's heart clenched tighter. The more they counted, the wider the door opened. And from within, a white figure began to emerge, hair covering the face, left hand holding the fabric bracelet Gordon had given Emily for her 9th birthday. The bracelet that vanished the winter she died. The figure smiled and mouthed without sound, "Now it's your turn to hide." Gordon didn't run, but every fiber in his body screamed. The white figure now stood within 3 strides. Hair hung over half its face, but he recognized those. Strands mud-matted the day they'd snuck out to the forest's edge. Its right hand had no fingers, just infected stumps, as if gnawed away. The left still clutched the tiny bracelet, red thread stitched into a star, the one Gordon had stolen from the corner shop for her. As it stepped forward, no footfall sounded, but the entire room sank as if into unseen mud. The air thinned. Gordon's vision blurred, but he still saw the figure's forehead open to reveal a third eye, deep and glistening with dead ink darkness. And when that eye fully opened, all sound vanished. No wind, no breath, not even his heartbeat. Only a single echo remained. Gordon, not a call, not a scream, just the weight of the name itself, driven like a red-hot needle into his mind. Every memory returned at once, the torn fabric in his hand, Emily's voice at dusk, the small fingers, grabbing his wrist by the pit, and the silence that followed. No scream, no struggle, just her final gaze from beneath the soil as Gordon shoveled in the first handful of dirt. Out of fear. Fear of punishment? Fear no one would believe him. Emily had slipped, hit her head on a stone. Her face had gone pale when Gordon tried shaking her, but she didn't move. He panicked, looked around. No one, no barking dogs, no passerby. He dug with his hands, buried her, and scattered dry leaves over the spot. Back inside, he cut his own arm to make a scratch, then told his mother, "Emily's hiding in the woods. I couldn't find her." From that night on, Emily's room stayed locked. But now, everything returned not as flashbacks, not as dreams, but through the being standing before him. Gordon doubled over, dry heaving, but nothing came up. Everything lodged in his chest, choking him like a forgotten confession. The stone. Door behind the figure remained open, and from within, hands reached out. No bodies, no shapes, just hands. Male, female, child-sized, covered in broken nails and scars, groping the air for something to drag back. One hand touched his shirt hem. Gordon jerked away. But the more he backed up, the more he realized the hallway was gone. Only a black void remained, like a well's mouth, and within it, hundreds of faces reflected all himself, at different ages, in moments he had tried to forget. Gordon at 13, laughing outside the locked bedroom. Gordon at 20, burning Emily's sweater to move on. Gordon at 28, waking to footsteps in the bathroom and pretending he didn't. Here, all of them watched him. Every face mouthed something, but none spoke aloud. Only one collective hiss filled his skull. "I've been waiting to be named." He couldn't take it anymore. He screamed, the sound tearing from his throat like splitting flesh. "Emily, it's me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just scared." The white figure froze, its third eye closed. But at that moment, every light in the room, which Gordon hadn't even realized were there, exploded. In the sudden darkness, he heard a whisper, clear and close to his left ear. Too late. A force like a crashing wave hurled Gordon backward. His spine slammed against a brick wall. His eyes flew open, but nothing remained. The room was gone, the stone door gone. The white figure vanished like mist. He was sitting in the woods. No house, no walls, just brush and a freshly turned patch of soil. In the hole, no body. Only a headless doll in a white dress, one. Arm snapped, mouth sewn shut with steel thread. On its chest was the bracelet, but no longer red. Now charred black, as if scorched. Gordon stood, but his legs wouldn't obey. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. Wind passed through the forest, carrying with it a lullaby from somewhere far off, words unclear. But the melody matched the song their mother once sang to them each night. When he looked up, the moon had risen, but it was warped, red like diluted. Blood, no stars in the sky, no path on the ground. And behind him came the sound of tiny wet footsteps pressing into the dry grass. Story 3. The One Replaced. No one remembers exactly when the town of Kerrigan was founded, nor is there any complete documentation. The land registry only contains a few vague lines. A residential area inhabited since the late 18th century, likely originating from an early coal mining community. But those who still lived there, or rather, those who hadn't yet managed to leave, always passed down one warning. Never dig too deep beneath the Black Hill, not because of weak ground or old gas mines, but because of a warning whispered. Through generations like the dying breath of someone in their last night, there are things that should never be awakened. The town lay in southern Wyoming, near the dead spruce forest, where winters lasted longer than usual, and the sun never shone past midday during early October. At the top of the hill was an abandoned postal station, once part of a private railway depot during the war, its tracks long removed. At the base of the hill sat a row of decrepit homes with sagging walls, moss-covered roofs, and a large, milk-white mansion standing alone like a rotted tooth in a corpse's mouth. That house once belonged to the Felton family, the wealthiest in Kerrigan for 3 generations, and the most cursed. Their youngest daughter, Miriam Felton, vanished in 1968 at the age of 10. No trace, no kidnapper. No blood, just a cold winter night, an open window, and an empty bed. Soon after, both Mr. and Mrs. Felton went mad, locking themselves in the wine cellar and never coming out again. They were found 3 weeks later when the stench of rot leaked through the bricks. Their faces were no longer intact. Their hands looked as though they had tried to claw their own eyes out before dying. Since then, the house remained abandoned in 1994. David Lorne, a young architect from Michigan, arrived in Kerrigan after inheriting a property from a distant uncle. It was the White Mansion. David knew little about the town, only thinking of the inheritance as a blessing. He had just gone through a divorce, lost custody of his child, and was nearly broke. A fresh start in a spacious house in a cheap town sounded like a gift from above that he'd moved in mid-September, just as the evening frost began cracking the mortar and dampening the wallpaper. On his first day, he discovered a door leading to a basement. Hidden behind the large bookshelf, something not shown on the house's original blueprints. The door was sealed with an old, rusty iron lock, but marks around it suggested it had been opened recently. He tried every key, he had none fit. While inspecting, David noticed a faint smear just under the doorframe, as if something or someone had crawled out, leaving claw marks smudged in the dust. He told no one. But that first night, unable to sleep due to the mildew smell, David heard something beneath the floor, not mice, not wind. It was a sound like someone scratching the wall with long fingernails, slow, soft, patient. He didn't sleep. At 4 a.m., the sound stopped. He told himself it was psychological. Maybe pipes, maybe wind in a crack. But the next morning, he found a trail resembling dried blood seeping under the basement door, something that wasn't there the day before. David called a locksmith. An old man came, stared at the lock for a few minutes, then said softly, "You want to go down there? Better not." David laughed, saying he just wanted to inspect the cellar structure. The locksmith said nothing more, only shook his head. and unlocked it, got the door open to a staircase of rotting wood. The air that rose from below wasn't musty or woody. It smelled of flayed skin and burnt hair. David switched on his flashlight. The basement was empty. No barrels. No furniture. Just 4 cold stone walls, a low ceiling that forced one to stoop. And at the center, a small patch of bare earth, as if construction had been left unfinished. Approaching it, he noticed a fine slit running through the dirt like a razor blade. It cut deep bottomless. And when he reached out to touch its edge, a breath rose from below. Not wind. Not a vent. Human breath. David slammed the basement door shut and locked it that same day. But that night, tapping began under the floor 3 knocks at a time, regularly, every 20 minutes. After the 3rd night, he began to hear a voice. Very soft, very sweet, very familiar. It came from beneath the floor right below his bedroom. David, David, do you remember me? He didn't answer. But each following night, the voice changed, sometimes a child, sometimes a woman, sometimes deep like a man who had smoked for decades, but the words never changed. David, do you remember me? After a week, David broke. He took gasoline to the basement, poured it around the slit, and tried to set it alight. But as soon as the flame caught, it was extinguished instantly, as if blown back from below. A giggle, like a child playing hide-and-seek, rang in his ears, though. No one else was in the basement at dawn. David fled Carrigan, driving straight without taking anything. He went to the local police, begging them to seal the house. But the report stated he was hallucinating due to stress. No one believed him. A year later, he was found dead by suicide in a rundown motel in Casper. On the wall, scratched in with fingernails, were the words, "The demon knows my name." The house was left abandoned by 1999. The white mansion at the foot of Black Hills still stood alone like a skull under unmelted fog. The last remaining residents of Carrigan gradually moved away, and no one dared approach except foolish kids, or the homeless with nowhere else to go. That autumn, Evelyn Gray, an anthropology student from Utah, arrived in Carrigan while researching her thesis on mountain folklore. She knew nothing of the Felton Mansion, only a marginal note on an old university library map. Empty house, signs of ancient worship. Evelyn was immediately intrigued. She arrived in Carrigan late one afternoon, as night fell quickly, and the last ray of light slashed across the church clock, like a blade to the heart of the street. She contacted no one, bringing only a film camera, a flashlight, and a notebook full of complex symbols. She had copied herself from scattered old texts. The house loomed, pale and taller than all surrounding roofs, with yellowish streaks on its walls like half-melted candle wax. Evelyn didn't expect a welcome. She climbed over the rusty gate, pushed open the main door, and immediately felt the air within had been severed from the rest of the world. No dust, no wind, no scent, just absolute emptiness, as if every memory had been vacuumed out, leaving a hollow shell outside of time. She saw the old staircase, the large bookshelf in the back left corner, and the narrow gap behind it where the iron door lay half revealed. Her researcher's instinct made her tremble with excitement. She wasn't afraid, not yet. She placed her hand on the basement handle. It was so cold it stuck to her skin. A pull from within tugged at her fingertip, not hard, but enough to throw off her heartbeat. When the door opened, she didn't turn on the light. She only used her flashlight to glide across the darkness like a beam through the sleep of death that Evelyn began documenting. Damp wooden steps, termite trails like burn marks. At the bottom, uneven ground, low ceiling, and 4 coarse walls with peeled paint revealing etched symbols. Each mark was a nest of interlocking circles and intersecting slashes like the dream. Sketches of a madman? She used wax pencil to record them, then moved to the center. She found the same slit David had seen. As she leaned closer, what struck her wasn't sight, but sound not loud, not whispering, but echoing from the hollow base of a skull. Do not speak the name wrong. Evelyn recoiled, but still shone her light into the slit. It had no bottom, just slick darkness like wrinkleless, flayed skin. Her flashlight flickered once. In that brief flash, she saw a pair of eyes staring back, not large, not glowing. Just two black dots, stretched wide to tearing, buried beneath the earth, not attached to a face. No shape visible, just eyes. Enough. To knock her backward, flashlight flying, notebook flung, and the back of her head slammed the wall. She awoke sometime later, unclear how long. The basement was still dark, but her flashlight dimly glowed. Her eyes throbbed like she had cried for hours, and her body felt frozen to the core. Somehow, the symbols on the wall had changed. Some had faded, replaced by other markings like letters, but not letters, as if scratched in by nails. On ground, her notebook lay open, a single page marked in steady red ink. "You spoke my name wrong." Evelyn froze. She had never spoken aloud, only written, only looked. But what if her attention alone had been enough to summon it? She backed toward the stairs, ready to flee, but when she looked up, there was no ceiling. In its place was a black sky, no stars, no moon, and in the center floated a figure upside down, hair dangling like tree roots. Its face was distorted with stitched scars, mouth sewn shut, but one eye remained open, not human. That eye glowed phosphorescent, deep blue, like the sky compressed into a well's bottom. Evelyn couldn't move. The floating ghost began descending inch by inch, and in her mind, like vocal cords torn from her throat, a scream rang endlessly. Blood for blood. Eye for eye, the name was wrong. The gate is open again. Evelyn didn't understand, but as her flashlight gave out, she caught one final glimpse. The slit in the basement had fully opened, and from within, a demon with no distinct form was slithering upward, its body woven from hair, dried blood, and broken bones of many people. The demon didn't scream. It didn't need to. The very air trembled with its presence. Evelyn wanted to scream, but her throat was sealed shut. Her legs wouldn't move. And just as its body reached the edge, a child's voice spoke from behind. "You called it wrong. Now you will take the place." Evelyn turned. A little girl stood there, blonde, in a blood-stained white dress. Her mouth was sewn shut, but her eyes were wide, and in her hand was the notebook, now changed, its cover stitched from human skin. And when Evelyn looked closer, the name on it was no longer hers. It read, Evelyn Felton. Then everything vanished. Asterisk, when the local kids found Evelyn's film camera lying in the backyard of the Felton house. Winter had begun to settle in, with a thin layer of snow scattered across the brown grass. The camera wasn't broken, but the entire roll of film inside had been burned black, as if roasted from the inside out. Carrigan police recorded the case as an unconfirmed missing person, and quickly brushed it off when no relatives came forward to ask questions. But just a few weeks later, the local station received an unmarked parcel. Inside was a dark leather-bound notebook, reeking of pitch oil and burnt ash. Though there was no return address, the cover was clearly labeled, Evelyn Felton, Field Notes on Southern Mountain Rituals. The notebook didn't resemble a standard research document. The first page bore a deep brown stain that looked like clotted blood, spreading across the paper like a handprint pressed directly into it. And at the bottom of the page was a jagged line, more carved than written. Its name is unknown. But if spoken wrong, the caller will be replaced. Do not repeat the name. Officer John Merrow, the night watchman, locked himself in the duty room after reading just one passage, set the notebook on fire with a lighter, then smashed his skull into the wall. The notebook's ashes were never found. Each page vanished, without a trace, as if it had never existed. From that day on, the house was sealed off. Authorities posted a warning sign citing foundation collapse risk. But the people of Carrigan knew the house would never fall because what lay beneath wouldn't allow it. Then, in the spring of 2000, an archaeology team from the University of Minnesota arrived in Carrigan to conduct a survey on early settler folk beliefs. They knew nothing of the house. Among them was a young historian named Caleb Dunn, pale, thin, eyes always slightly unfocused like someone with chronic insomnia. Caleb had discovered Evelyn's notes in the university library archives, submitted by an unknown source, and once he read them, he became obsessed, dreaming of them nightly. Each time he slept, he found himself standing before a bottomless slit between 4 stone walls, with a voice neither male nor female whispering in a language that didn't exist. Caleb led the group to Kerrigan under the pretense of surveying foundational folklore, but upon arriving in town, an old woman at a diner grabbed his hand, her mouth not visibly moving. Yet in his mind, he heard one clear sentence: "If you call it, it will remember." Caleb told no one. That night, he slipped into the Felton house alone. The barriers were rotted, the iron gate fell easily. The house still stood as if untouched by time, no cracked bricks, no sagging roof, though the inside was layered in a century's worth of untouched dust. Caleb didn't have to search. The basement door opened by itself as soon as he stepped into the living room. He brought with him a flashlight, a notebook, and a small artifact, an oval-shaped stone found in the dead spruce forest, carved with irregular slashes, later matching the symbols in Evelyn's notes. Caleb wasn't afraid. He was thrilled. Each step down the basement stairs felt like descending into his own ancient memory. The 4 walls reappeared, and the slit in the floor was still open. But this time, something had risen from it, a hump of earth like a spine. Red moss clung to it, and from within protruded black strands like oily human hair. Caleb approached, placing the stone into the center of the slit. Instantly, the ground trembled. A sound burst forth, not voice, not wind, but a sequence of vibrations that tore the surrounding air apart. The basement darkened. His flashlight died. In the darkness, he heard something crawling along the walls, slow, deliberate, and wherever. It moved. The stone groaned as if melting from intense heat. He pulled out his notebook, turned to the final page of Evelyn's notes, and read aloud for the first time. A single line. He didn't know what he said. The language wasn't human, but after he spoke, the demon opened its eyes. It didn't take form. It didn't need to. The very air in the basement was swallowed of all light, and a breath rose from the slit like 1,000 mouths moaning in unison. Then by Caleb's ear, a child's voice whispered, "Do you remember me?" Caleb trembled. His hands bled as his fingernails tore through his own skin. For a split second, he saw before him a shape slithering like a crack in ice, not made of flesh, but of hair and blood, woven from the miscalled names of the long dead. Miriam Felton appeared, but not as a little girl, as something shapeless, eyes endless, skin like ash from a burned throat. She didn't speak, but images slammed into Caleb's mind like someone threading reels of film directly through his. Eyes, blood rites, deep carved circles, adults offering their children to a mouth and the earth, and cries strangled by razor shards wedged into windpipes. Miriam's ghost was never whole. She was never just a child. She was the first fracture in the veil that kept the demon below. And now, with Caleb misnaming it, the gate had opened. He fell. The notebook dropped. The light went out. And the basement returned to silence. The next morning, the archaeology team couldn't find Caleb, but they found the stone on the steps, seeping blood. Over the following weeks, each member of the group died. One hanged, one stabbed, one disappeared. No one linked the deaths. But on the same night, each of them dreamed of a little girl in a white dress standing in a basement, whispering, "Do you remember me? There are sins without shape, without trace on paper or flesh, but they linger in soil like blood pooled after a blade has passed." Kerrigan is such a place. It was once called the Land Without Echo by early 19th century settlers, who pitched tents at the foot of the Black Hill, not for fertile ground, but because of a strange whisper. This place does not return speech, meaning the devil's offspring will not find it. But they were wrong. That silence was not protection, it was listening. In 1852, the Felton family were the first to strike an axe into this land. They came from the north, bringing silent children, a blind wife, and a book with no title. The patriarch, Jeremiah Felton, was listed as a missionary, but among the moldy archives of the state library, one unsent letter was found, its seal erased. We no longer follow God. That God has been silent too long. Now we turn to the one who answered first. And the one who answered first is never a savior. Deep beneath the hill, in a hand-dug chamber with no blueprint and no justification, Jeremiah built a circle, not for food storage as he claimed, but to bind a covenant. From the first lines of the untitled book, "O you who lie between the 9th and 10th layers of earth, I summon not by name, but by blood." The first offering was a goat. The second, a lost traveler. The third, Jeremiah's blind wife, whom he claimed could not see, so her heart could hear the one below. They cut out her eyes, dropped them into the slit, and waited 10 nights. On the 11th night, she stood, though she had died on the 5th. She no longer spoke human words, but Jeremiah understood. His face twisted in bliss. It has answered. From then on, the house atop the hill was no longer a home, but a prison. The Felton line was tasked generation after generation with sealing the thing beneath, not to protect the world, but to uphold the bargain that each generation would offer fresh blood to keep the demon asleep. No one remembers its name. No one dares write it. It's only called That Which Is Buried But Never Dead. Miriam Felton, the girl who vanished in 1974, was not a random victim. She was the last blood heir. But when the ritual began, Miriam ran. She hid behind brick walls, climbed into the basement, hoping to break the circle. But as she read the symbols she had secretly studied from her parents' book, she didn't know that a single wrong word could disrupt the right, and she read it wrong. The demon was not appeased. The seal warped, and Miriam, instead of escaping, became the one who plugs the gap. Her soul, small and splintered with fear, was forced to become the first layer of skin that held the demon back, not fully risen, not fully trapped. Since then, anyone who enters the basement and calls the wrong name will be used to replace the next layer of that skin. Evelyn, Caleb, they weren't the first and certainly won't be the last. Each leaves behind a trace of blood, an off-key sound, an absence. And the demon grows, its body thickens, woven from hair, nails, bones, and miscalled names. They say on the first night of winter, if you stand before the Felton house and whisper, "Do you remember me?" you'll hear soft footsteps behind you, but if you turn around, your eyes will burst with blood. The price of a wrong name is not death. It is substitution. One soul in, one soul out. No one knows how many now reside inside the basement, grafted into that patchwork of skin. But one thing is certain. Once the final layer is complete, the demon will no longer need the circle. It will stand. No one remembers its name. But in the last scrap of paper Evelyn wrote before vanishing, found buried in the dust of the University of Utah's library, there was one line in blood, repeated over and over. Do not call the name wrong. Do not call the name wrong. Do not call the name wrong. Asterisk in the fall of 2001. A sudden earthquake lasting only a few seconds caused the ground around Carrigan to tremble as if a wave of heat had surged up from beneath the town. No one died, no buildings collapsed, but a massive boulder rolled down from the side of Black Hill, revealing the ancient foundation of a black stone structure belonging to no known culture in the region. The first surveyors entered for only a few minutes, but when they emerged, all bore the same symptoms. Eyes clouded white, fingertips bleeding, and unable to speak except to whisper. It's opening its eyes. The news didn't spread far, but one person heard, Eliza Rowan, a researcher of ancient religious architecture who had been expelled from the Institute of Ethno-Archaeology for publicly claiming that some rituals were never meant for worship, but for containment. Mocked by academia, Eliza lived in seclusion for nearly a decade until she received an anonymous letter from Carrigan. It contained only a blurred photograph of the newly revealed stone and the words, "It has shifted." Eliza arrived in Carrigan, unannounced, bringing with her a metal trunk of rare artifacts, including the only surviving handwritten copy of a sacred text unearthed in Belarus, referencing the ninth object beneath, the one who must be bound by its own name. But what truly unsettled Eliza was a final passage in the text, seemingly added in a forbidden language, translated as, "When the child with the false face speaks the true name, the gate will rupture." She didn't know what the child with the false face meant until she stepped into the Felton house. Time had worn the house down, cracked walls, collapsed doors, yet the basement below remained untouched. The closer she got, the more Eliza felt her feet sinking, not into mud, but into memory miscalled names, silenced deaths, breath trapped in throats. When she reached the final step, the space transformed. The basement ceiling was no longer stone, but a stretched skin-like membrane, thin as spider silk, from which hundreds of tiny human forms hung suspended, eyeless, mouthless, each bearing a paper tag on the chest with names: Evelyn, Caleb, David, and many more faded names like erased memories that hadn't truly disappeared. Eliza approached the center rift in the floor, no longer a crack, but a massive mouth, toothless, tongueless, exhaling cold gusts that sounded like the whispers of 1,000 souls drained of their names. From her trunk, she retrieved a bronze, masked childlike, expressionless, hollow-eyed, with an inscription across the forehead, the replaced one. She placed the mask on the ground, pulled from her notebook a sequence of never-before-published symbols, her translation of the language of imprisonment. As Eliza began to read, the entire basement quivered like a body being flayed. Each word tore at the invisible threads binding the walls, and on the membrane above, a tear opened through it. Miriam Felton fell. But she was no longer a girl. Miriam's spirit had become a warped fusion of human and demon, her skin molten wax, tangle. With hair, one arm that of an adult skeleton, the other still an underdeveloped child's limb. She did not scream, she did not beg. She only looked at Eliza, and with a sound that echoed from within Eliza's own mind, "Sad, if you speak the true name, I will be released." Eliza trembled, eyes scanning the final line of her translation. A name, unpronounceable, not meant to be spoken. But it was the true name? She understood. To end this, the name had to be called, and that act would fully open the gate. But if left unspoken, Miriam would remain imprisoned, and the circle would continue claiming victims. Eliza was no saint. But she had once been an orphan, had lived in a home where no one ever called her by her real name due to lost records. She knew the feeling of being forgotten. She read the name, not aloud, but with her mind. And instantly, the ground erupted. The basement shrieked like dry lungs tearing open. The mouth in the earth contracted in seizure, and all the light in the chamber condensed into a searing red beam, shooting up through the ceiling, ripping the skin membrane, blowing the roof off the Felton house. Trees within a 3-mile radius withered. The air was stripped from the lungs of every living thing. And beneath the settling red dust, when all went still, only cracked earth remained, and in the center, a small body, no longer wearing a mask. Little girl, hair tangled, chest barely rising and falling. And for the first time in decades, she opened her mouth and said, "My name is Miriam." The spirit was freed. The demon did not rise. But in Eliza's final journal entry, written in blood on parchment, there was one warning. It now knows that someone can call its true name. Next time, it will teach them to speak it in its own tongue. And when that happens, order will break. Miriam survived. Kerrigan lay in ruin. Eliza vanished. No one knows what price was paid, but that winter, amid the season's first snowfall, someone heard a whisper echoing from Black Hill. My name is no longer forgotten,